We're beginning Chapter 19, The CIA in Africa, of Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, Nature, Accident, or Intentional. Among the COINTELPRO strategies proposed during the Nixon era and carried out by the CIA to help resolve the Negro question, the challenge posed by black militants that Kissinger and Hoover feared was African-based and communist-inspired was the encouragement of cultural nationalism and black capitalism. The CIA during the Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan administrations played with the fires of revolutionary black consciousness to expand America's political and economic power in Africa. Under Kissinger's direction, the CIA organized the State Department, the U.S. Information Agency, the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, and other organizations to combat black militarism. According to CIA observers, an American intelligence community sought to influence the policies of newly independent African states by creating and subsidizing an American elite of Afro-oriented black leaders whose positions in the civil rights movement were invaluable, though often unconscious, cover for the CIA's principal aim to emasculate black radicalism in Africa and eventually at home. Meanwhile, the Nixon administration quietly expanded contacts with South Africa's white governments. This resulted in what Robert Smith, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, called a number of concrete developments ranging from major new economic undertakings such as the Azores Agreement with Portugal located off the northwestern coast of Africa, to the authorization of previously forbidden states of jet aircraft to Portugal and South Africa. This new, more right-wing U.S. policy had been established by Henry Kissinger in his Secret Policy Memorandum of 1969. The effort resulted in a CIA South African Armed Forces collaborated attack on Angola in the early 1970s. The organizational chain of command for the Angola operation is seen in Figure 19.1. Here's Figure 19.1. Pause it if you need better look-see at it. Where were we? Okay. The censored and bewildering memorandum from the National Security Council meeting between Nixon, Kissinger, and their staff was financially deciphered in 1983 by researchers at the Center for National Security Studies. In their report, The Consequences of Pre-Republican Review, a case study of censorship of the CIA and the cult of intelligence. The Center's report stated that most bewildering of all examples of intelligence censorship was a series of items concerning Africa. The National Security Council in December 1969 apparently censored certain passages, including one that, once read, "The purpose of this session was to decide what American policy should be toward the governments of South Africa." A few lines down, the censors cut in mid-sentence, "There was a sharp disagreement with the government on how hard a line that the United States should take with the restored," it goes on, "white minority regimes of South Africa, Rhodesia, and the Portuguese colonies in Africa." Then two words were cut from this sentence. Henry Kissinger talked about the kind of general posture the United States could maintain toward the blank and outlined specific policy options open to the president. The missing words turn out to be white regimes. Finally, the censors cut a reference to the fact that Kissinger had sent a National Memorandum Study and National Security Study Memorandum, NSSM 39, National Security Study Memorandum, to the departments interested in Southern Africa. National Security, I'm trying to understand or comprehend these Abbreviations. National Security Study Memorandum. National Security Study Memorandum 39 was in fact published and widely discussed in 1974. It took the view that the various movements for the majority rule in southern Africa were unlikely to succeed soon. All of this led the security studies investigators to conclude, to the extent that those censored passages on Africa point anywhere, it is toward a discussion of policy. The Kissinger-Nixon policy was founded on the belief that the Portuguese would hold on to their African colonies indefinitely. Within a few years, that premise was shattered, and the whole policy had to be reappraised. As a result of their findings, the researchers asked, is there any serious argument of security that the American public schools should not have been allowed, 5 years afterward, to reflect on the wisdom of the policy and the way it was made? What has it got to do with CIA secrets? One answer recalling Gallo's speculation that Portuguese sailors had carried the AIDS virus from Africa to Asia might be that the secrecy surrounding African affairs helped conceal Project MK Naomi and possibly Kissinger's genocidal directives. Gallo's Portuguese sailors then could plausibly have been undercover agents for the CIA. Kissinger's appeal. By the end of Ford's presidency, in response to increasing congressional pressure, Kissinger finally revealed some of his secret intelligence community undertakings. He appealed to a Senate Committee on Government Operations for continued support for the CIA. To accomplish this, he pleaded for trust and sounder relations between executive and legislative branches of government. Kissinger said, "The present relationship has reached a point where the ability of the United States to conduct a coherent foreign policy is being eroded. This is certainly true in the intelligence field. One has only to look at the recent leakage, indeed, office publication of highly classified material, and the levying of unsubstantiated charges and personal attacks against the executive to see the point the relationship has reached and the harm we are doing to ourselves. Fundamental changes are taking place in the world at an unprecedented rate. New centers of power are emerging, altering relationships among older power centers. Growing economic interdependence makes each of us vulnerable to financial and industrial troubles in countries formerly quite remote from us. I am aware of the benefits of a certain amount of dynamic tension between the branches of our government. Indeed, the Founding Fathers designed this into the Constitution, with the principle of separation of powers. But there is an adverse impact on the public mind in this country and on our national image abroad when this beneficial tension deteriorates into confrontation. We have recently seen this happen. This is why I hope this committee and the Congress as a whole, with the help and suggestions from the executive, can construct an oversight mechanism for U.S. intelligence that can bring an end to the strife, distrust, and confusion that have accompanied the investigations of the past year. Kissinger was referring to the Church Committee's investigation into the CIA stockpile of biological weapons, leaks about covert intelligence operations in Zaire and Angola, as well as the continued fallout over the agency's established role in the Watergate break-ins. He continued, I look to the development of means by which Congress can participate more fully in the guidance and review of the intelligence activities of this government, and by which the executive can direct and conduct those activities with the confidence of being in step with Congress in this vital area of our foreign affairs. Superficially, Congress was being asked to rationalize CIA activities in Angola and in terms of the country's strategic location adjacent the shipping lanes of the South Atlantic. Giant tankers brought oil from the Middle East around the Horn of Africa to the United States. Moreover, Kissinger argued, our foreign policy must cope with complex problems of nuclear and conventional arms races. Nixon noted Africa held one-fourth of the world's known uranium ore reserves, traditional and ideological disputes which can trigger wider wars, and sweeping economic dislocations, emerging new nations which can become the arena for great power contests. Environmental pollution, food shortages, and energy maldistribution, which affect the lives of hundreds of millions, and financial shifts which can threaten the global economic order. In the face of these great changes, our goals are to foster the growth of a rationally ordered world in which states of diverse views and objectives can cooperate for the common benefit. We seek a world based on justice and the promotion of human dignity, emphasis added. Yet, despite this rationale, John Stockwell, the former chief of the CIA's Angola Task Force and the author of In Search of Enemies, a CIA story, argued that Angola, the focus of Kissinger's covert military operation, had little importance to America's national security. Angola, he wrote, was merely Kissinger's folly in seeking an opportunity to challenge the Soviets. Though Stockwell failed to acknowledge the lucrative defense contracts Kissinger was generating for his benefactors, he noted that the Foreign Affairs Secretary had conspicuously overruled his advisers and refused to seek diplomatic solutions in the region. The question was, would the American people, so recently traumatized by Vietnam, have tolerated even a modest involvement in another remote, confusing Third World civil war? I guess that's what's happening right now. Covert operations in Africa. Covert action was the game ordered by Kissinger for Angola and carried out by the CIA and other African nations as well. All of this occurred at the time the Vatican War was winding down and Nixon's war on cancer was heating up. Sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, became the target of numerous clandestine activities destined to influence black-ruled governments, events, organizations, or persons in support of U.S. foreign policy conducted in such a way that involvement of the U.S. government was not apparent. Among the organizations used to conceal intelligence operations and position agents in various parts of Africa were PUSH, People to Save Humanity, Africare, CARE, the Peace Corps, the Rockefeller and Ford Foundations, the WHO, the World Bank, the CDC, and USAID. In addition, NASA was engaged in Central West Africa, allegedly for famine relief, and the National Academy of Sciences was enrolled to provoke scientific advisory services covering a spectrum of disciplines. Philip Agee, co-author of Dirty Work 2, The CIA in Africa, and an ex-operative who served in Africa until 1969, explained that secret services, the CIA and those of the other pro-Western powers, provided money, equipment, instructions, and information to ingenious agents so as to enable them to take action wherein they hoped the hand of the Secret Service would not show. I learned from Agee that the official designation of covert action had changed to special activities or special actions. An example familiar to me was the Army's Biological Weapons Handling Division termed Special Operations. So yeah, JSOC now, Joint Special Operations Corps? Yeah. Agee wrote that these secret military operations in Africa, particularly in Zaire and Angola, continued throughout the 1970s and beyond. Covert action has been described as governmental intervention in the wide gray area between polite, correct diplomacy and outright military action. In the mid-1970s, public revulsion in America to the CIA's political interventions, assassination operations, and other dirty work produced hope in some that covert action, at least in peacetime, would be reduced or even renounced altogether, and the earlier concern over human rights in the Carter administration added to this hope, because gross violations in human rights normally result from the CIA's clandestine interventions. It took just 1 year for these hopes to be dashed, confirming the belief of many that such hopes were not realistic from the start. In January 1978, 1 year after taking office, President Carter promulgated an executive order that tightened control over the CIA's covert action operations, but at the same time provided exceptions that would allow the president to order the CIA to do everything it had done in the past except political assassinations of heads of state. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case for lesser heads that continued to roll. In fact, just 7 months following Carter's executive order, Africa Diary carried a report broadcast over Uganda radio entitled, CIA Accused of Plot to Assassinate Amin. The article quoted a military spokesman saying, "It's a shame that a country of the stature of the U.S. should allow its agencies to indulge in such evil schemes and then turn around and pose as a promulgator of peace and champion of human rights." The report referred to a statement broadcast by NBC Radio in which the former CIA Director William Colby was quoted as saying the intelligence agency had tried since 1972 to kill the Ugandan leader. God bless Colby, man. Mr. Colby also stated, according to Uganda Radio, that it was up to Ugandans to assassinate President Amin, and that $1 million had been placed at the disposal of Ugandans to carry out the mission by any means, including poison. Indeed, the covert actions practiced by the CIA, Agee explained, continually violated principles of international law, the United States, character, and local laws, as well as contradicted the flowing rhetoric about non-intervention in the internal affairs of other nations. Agee concluded that, for Africans and others on the receiving end of America's covert action, any debate may well seem irrelevant, for the fact is that these operations have never stopped. Human investments in sub-Saharan Africa. A key player in administering CIA operations in sub-Saharan Africa was Frank C. Carlucci III. Carlucci, while advancing through the ranks of military intelligence, became the point man for CIA-infested healthcare programs in various parts of Africa. Before becoming Deputy Director of the CIA in 1978, Deputy Secretary of Defense in 1980, and National Security Advisor during the Iran-Contra scandal, Carlucci served as Chief Political Officer in the African Congo's embassy during the early 1960s. There, according to observers, he became the brains of the embassy and wrote from Leopoldville a daily political analysis, a true calendar of destabilization. For the management of the Department of State, later, under Nixon, he was promoted to the position of Deputy of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. From here, Carlucci administered covert action operations through the DHEW front. In one instance, on February 15, 1975, following the protested arrival of American health officials to Portugal, Carlucci defended, "There are rumors of covert operations. One of them concerns the visit of a group of doctors. The first time I heard of them was in the Portuguese press. Now they are tourists. Does Portugal want tourists to come or not? This has nothing to do with the American aid to this country in the domain of health. Nonetheless, 3 weeks later, Portuguese specialists protested. Consider the offer to the U.S. to build hospitals in Lisbon, Porto, and the City of the South, and the offer to send technicians to help in the domain of health and others, considering that these offers originate from the Agency for International Development, an organization well known as an instrument of the CIA, considering that those loans and grants serve as cover for the enemy of the Portuguese people. We call attention of the government to the real damages that this type of support hides, and whose consequences have been revealed in Chile, Santo Domingo, Bolivia, Guatemala, and in so many other martyred countries. On February 28, 1975, while the rumors spread that the CIA had decided to make human investments in Portugal, Frank Carlucci, to prove America's good faith and desire to respect the wishes of the Portuguese people, signed 2 agreements, one for a credit of $1 million for technicians to come study the improvements of communications and the health services, and the other grant, a grant of $750,000 to Portugal through Assistance for International Development, AID. Other examples of various USAID, WHO, and NATO-supported vaccination, population control, and material and child health programs, along with selected program descriptions. These documents were published in 1975 by the Department of State in their report on the health, population, and nutrition activities of the Agency for International Development for fiscal year 1973 and 1974. These programs afforded CIA agents access to virtually every country in Africa. The Zaire-Angola War continues. By 1974, Angola's neighboring state, Zaire, had been effectively persuaded to initiate defense operations against its enemies in Angola. Apparently, both Zaire and Zambia, which shares Zaire's southern and Angola's eastern borders, needed little coaxing. They both allegedly feared the prospect of a Soviet-backed government on their flanks and communist control over the commercially imported Benguela Railroad. Zaire's president, Mobutu, was especially afraid of the Soviets. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, he had courted the Chinese at the expense of both the Soviets and the Americans. By the spring of 1975, Stockwell wrote, Zaire's internal problems had mounted until Mobutu's regime was threatened by civil upheaval. Following 15 years of independence, Zairean agriculture had not returned to pre-revolution levels, despite the doubling of the population. By then, more than $700 million had been invested in Zaire by Western institutions. The economy was stagnant, in part owing to the conspicuous arrogance and corruption of the governing elite, who had been substantially supported by NATO allies, particularly the United States and West Germany. In 1975, world copper prices plummeted under Zaire's economy. Concurrently, fighting in Angola closed at the Benguela Railroad. This forced Zaire to export its goods through Zambia, Rhodesia, and South Africa. At this important point in Zaire's short history, Mobutu turned on Western imperialists. Desperately seeking a scapegoat, Mobutu had turned on the United States, accusing its Kinshasa embassy of fomenting a coup against him. In June 1975, he expelled the American ambassador and arrested most of the CIA's Zairean agents, placing some of them under death sentences. Following years of financial support, Mobutu turned on his American financiers and claimed the CIA... Oh, wait, I just read that. The precedent for presidential assassinations had been set not long. Wait a minute. The precedent for presidential assassinations had been set not long before. In October 1975, Sidney Gottlieb, the same man who frantically shredded Project MK Naomi documents on the eve of the Church Committee hearings into the CIA's illegal storage and intended use of biological weapons, told congressional investigators that the CIA had intended in 1961 to poison the Congolese premier. Patrice Lumumba, Mobutu's arch rival, the CIA assassination attempt was preempted, however, by others who Gottlieb alleged got to Lumumba first. Gottlieb was a very knowledgeable witness. In 1961, he headed the CIA's chemical division, which had made up the unused lethal dose and dispatched it to the Congo, now Zaire. For Lumumba's murder, Kissinger naturally denied Mobutu's allegation of a CIA coup when CBS Evening News anchorman Walter Cronkite asked for his reaction. Cronkite: "A story has just crossed our desk from Zaire that the U.S. ambassador has been declared persona non grata, at least has been asked to leave the country, presumably over the allegation that Americans were involved in a plot against President Mobutu's life. Have you any reaction to that?" Kissinger: "Well, these allegations are totally unfounded. As we regret that this decision had been taken, we do consider Zaire one of the key countries of Africa with which we would like to maintain cordial relations, and the action was based on totally wrong information that fell into the hands of the government of Zaire, probably as a result of forgery." Cronkite: "As a result of what, sir?" Kissinger: "It must have been a forgery, because we had absolutely no connection with any plot, nor did we know there was a plot." Kissinger then directed the interview to a safer topic. Within 5 months of the broadcast, however, the National Security Council director once again needed to defend his Central African policies. This time, standing before Congress, Kissinger pleaded for additional support for military operations in Zaire. With or without Mobutu's support, he obviously intended to hold this Central African turf. Kissinger explained, "There are two significant programs proposed for Africa. Stability in the Horn of Africa has wider geopolitical meaning. To help maintain that stability, we propose $12.6 million in grant aid and $10 million in credits for Ethiopia, a strategically located nation, a country in the northeastern part of the continent, far removed from the Horn." Kissinger, then President Ford's foreign policy advisor, continued, "Zaire would receive $19 million in credits to help modernize its forces and meet its legitimate defense needs in view of increased threats to its security, particularly that posed by the instability in Angola. Our aid would help meet a defense force needed Our aid would help meet a defense force need recommended by a U.S. military team after careful observation and consultation with the Zaire military." Additionally, Kissinger revealed before the House Committee on International Relations that America's share of NATO African defense budget was $68.5 million. Yet even this was far less than the $100 million the CIA received to wage covert war in Angola. History of Central African aggression. Aside from the Vietnam War, the Angola conflict became America's largest military operation since World War II. In CIA 40 Inglorious Years, author P.K. Goswami summarized the events leading up to the aggression. The Angola people won their independence after long years of intense struggle led by MPLA, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. On November 11, 1975, the People's Republic of Angola proclaimed and most nations recognized its independence. However, the victory of the progressive forces dedicated to the struggle against colonialist holdovers, South African racism, and imperialist forays was seen as a challenge in Pretoria, and especially in Washington. The U.S. administration immediately took an openly hostile stand and tried to bring down the new popular government by force, coordinating its efforts with South Africa. The CIA received some $100 million to assist National Union for the Complete Independence of Angola, UNITA, and National Front for the Liberation of Angola, FNLA. Counter-revolutionary groups led by CIA puppets Jonas Savimbi and Holden Roberto, U.S. Air Force transport planes, airlifted weapons and ammunition to UNITA and FNLA by base in Zaire. U.S. military advisors and instructors appeared in the counter-revolutionary units. American mercenaries took part in military action against Angolans. According to John Prados, author of The President's Secret Wars, CIA and Pentagon covert operations from World War II through Iran's Cam, Angola was viewed as a Cold War necessity. Nathaniel Davis, the newly appointed Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, was assigned by Kissinger to study the region's political and military challenges. Davis, according to his own account, has already advised Kissinger against covert support in Zambimbi, who was soliciting arms everywhere, explained Prados. UNITA has been receiving some from the Chinese since 1974 and had ties to Mao Zedong for a decade before that. Davis warned Kissinger that the United States would have to confront probable disclosure and argued that at most we would be in a position to commit limited resources and by marginal influence. Consequently, the interagency group chaired by Davis recommended non-intervention. Instead, they urged diplomatic efforts in the hope that the three factors might reach a political settlement. Big-ass military planes. This reflected a basic understanding that Angola was an African and not a Cold War problem. Military intervention, Prados wrote, promised to strain already tense relations across Africa, particularly insofar as Portugal was concerned. Intervention offered only limited benefits and potentially contributed to increased involvement by the Soviet Union and other foreign powers. But Kissinger intervened to gag the Davis's group council, Prados documented. According to the Pike Committee, which studied the Angola covert operation in some detail, the Davis Group's recommendation was removed from their report at the direction of the National Security Council aides and presented to the National Security Council as merely one policy option, the others being to do nothing or to make a substantial intervention. The June 13th report of the interagency group was thus used to frame a stark choice for President Ford, who Kissinger persuaded to select the intervention option. Action then returned to the 40 Committee, dominated in 1975, as before by Henry Kissinger. Meeting on July 14th, the special group directed the CIA to propose a covert action program within 48 hours. Operation Feature was the result. Although the evidence is not yet clear, it appears that the top leadership at Langley may have opposed this intervention. The CIA came back to warn of the risk of exposure, as well as to estimate a $100 million price tag for the effort, an amount that was not available in the Department of Counterintelligence's contingency fund. Nevertheless, the 40 Committee gave the go-ahead, and on July 17th, President Ford approved an expenditure of $14 million. The CIA, which had advised against Track 2 in Chile and the Kurdish operation, was again given marching orders, for which it was lukewarm. That a plan was proposed at all was used by Kissinger in 1976. Senate testimony argued that the CIA recommended the operation and supported it. In the end, the intervention played out as its opponents had predicted. As in Vietnam, despite massive Allied investments, the Western intruders fared poorly. In the end, the intervention played out as the opponents had predicted. As in Vietnam, despite massive Allied investments, the Western intruders fared poorly. The situation required reinforcements, and South Africa's regular troops were lured in. Back home, the CIA's action in Angola resulted in waves of protest. With Southeast Asian wounds still stinging, the American public demanded an end to Kissinger's secret war in Central Africa. By 1976, public outrage forced the U.S. Congress to enact the Clark Amendment, designed to ban covert and open aid to UNITA and FNLA. The Clark Amendment, however, did little to stop the regional aggression. Support for the counter-revolutionaries continued as Kissinger effectively shamed Congress for passing the restrictive amendment. He then politically overpowered his adversaries and continued to direct destabilization efforts in Angola with support from racist South Africa. Later, in a concerted effort to vindicate himself and rebuild political support for his Angolan initiatives, in February 1976, Kissinger unveiled the CIA operation in Zaire. He recalled the region's aggressive history and executed his decision to deploy covert forces in the area this way. The outcome in Angola will have repercussions throughout Africa. The confidence of countries neighboring Angola, Zambia, and Zaire, as well as other African countries, in the will and power of the United States will be severely shaken if they see that the Soviet Union and Cuba are unopposed in their attempt to impose a regime of their choice on Angola. The means we have chosen have been limited and explained to Congress. Our immediate objective was to provide leverage for diplomatic efforts to bring about a just and peaceful solution. They were not conceived unilaterally by the United States. They represented support to friends who requested our financial assistance. We chose covert means because we wanted to keep our visibility to a minimum. We wanted the greatest possible opportunity for an African solution. We felt that over-assistance would be elaborate. We felt that overt assistance would elaborate a formal doctrine justifying great power intervention. The Angola situation is of a type in which diplomacy without leverage is impotent. Yet direct military confrontation would involve unnecessary risks. Thus, it is precisely one of those gray areas where covert methods are crucial if we are to have any prospect of influencing certain events of politically global importance. If we choose a covert form of response with the greatest reluctance, but in doing so, we were determined to adhere to the highest standard of executive legislative consultation. 8 congressional committees were briefed on 24 separate occasions. We sought in these briefings to determine the wishes of Congress. While we do not claim that every member approved our actions, we had no indication of basic opposition. Between July and December 1975, we discussed the Angolan situation on numerous occasions with members of Foreign Relations Committees and the Appropriations Committees of both House and and the committee of both houses. What? Between July and December 1975, we discussed the Angolan situation on numerous occasions with members of the Foreign Relations Committees and the Appropriations Committee of both House and the committees of both houses that have CIA oversight responsibilities. The two committees investigating CIA activities, the Church Committee and the Pike Committee, were also briefed. Altogether, more than 24 senators, about 150 congressmen, and over 100 staff members of both houses were informed. So the Church Committee, I realized, was briefed that the Zaire-Angola arena was a gray area, targeted for covert military operations, and thus a likely proving ground for the CIA's preferred gray area arsenal. In this case, biological weapons. Kissinger had effectively incriminated himself and Congress as well. The Church Committee's investigation of the illegal storage and, according to Colby, anticipated the use of biological weapons, concealed Project MK Naomi's apparent application in Central Africa. Subsequent administration's policy in Zaire. Stephen Weissman, a U.S. African relations critic and political science scholar, gathered additional details about the Zaire-Angola conflict. Weissman, who in 1978 was an associate professor at the University of Texas in Dallas, and who later joined the staff of the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee, Africa Subcommittee, noted how this region represented important NATO interests, though he admitted the actual Russian threat was in the region was minimal. Weissman chronicled events in the region beginning in March 1977, when an estimated 800 to 1,500 armed leftist Katangan exiles returned to their home province from neighboring Angola and nearly toppled the Mobutu government. As the poorly paid and politically demoralized 60,000-man Zairean army proved to be ineffective, the regime was forced to call upon 1,200 Moroccan troops, 80 French military advisors, about 50 Egyptian pilots and mechanics, French transport planes, and Belgian and Chinese arms. Although the new U.S. Carter administration was reluctant to lead the counter-revolution, no arms or advisors were dispatched. It did provide tangible aid, $15 million of combat support equipment, and President Carter's request for $32.5 million in military aid for Zaire in fiscal year 1978, half the total for Africa indicated a continuing commitment to the Mobutu regime. Furthermore, there is evidence of CIA covert action planning in the days before Mobutu was able to clinch his French and Moroccan personnel support. In an open letter of resignation to the CIA director, Angola Task Force Chief Stockwell charged, "Yes, I know you are attempting to generate token support to help Zaire meet its crisis, that you are seeking out the same French mercenaries the CIA sent into Angola in early 1976. These are the men who took the CIA money and fled the first time they encountered heavy shelling." By June 1977, Mobutu's foreign supporters had contained the Katangan threat as the exiles retreated to fight a guerrilla rather than a conventional war. Other problems of political fragmentation also prevented the Katangans from gaining the active support of similarly disposed forces in other areas of Zaire, Weissman acknowledged. Still, the Mobutu's regime, military humiliation, and demonstrated political weakness suggested that its days were numbered. Most academic experts and many diplomats expected a military or military-civilian coup to unseat Mobutu in the near future. The new government was expected to have or take account of anti-U.S. and anti-CIA sentiment. If the U.S. preserved in its close association with Mobutu. Nonetheless, Western and United States intervention on behalf of Mobutu intensified, as did the political cleavages in Africa. While a few small conservative and French-speaking African governments encouraged Western intervention, many leading countries, not all of them, leftists criticized such incursion. For example, the official newspaper of moderate Zambia stated, "The almost obscene haste with which the West has rushed to pour arms into Zaire reinforces the argument of many Africans that behind every attempted or successful coup on this continent is the hand of a foreign power. Although Cyrus Vance and others have not come out and said so bluntly, there is little doubt that they are hoping for a full-scale confrontation between Zaire and Angola. It gives them an opportunity to make amends for alleged betrayal of the anti-MPLA forces during the Civil War. It is to be hoped that President Carter puts a halt to this political adventurism before it is saddled with his own Vietnam. If he and his administration hope to come out of such confrontation with their image in Africa unscathed, they need to do some rethinking." Significant reservations were expressed by Nigeria, Tanzania, and Algeria. The Angolan War raised the possibility of future counteraction in Rhodesia and Southwest Africa as well. The primary rationale for United States involvement, however, continued Weissman explained, it was clear that behind such official slogans as friendship, historic ties, and territorial integrity lurked the fear of a pro-Soviet regime in the geographic center of Africa. Yet there was no evidence that the anti-Mobutu Katangans were Soviet-influenced. Indeed, the populist flavor of their propaganda was more reminiscent of Lumumbism than of even Angolan Marxism. Ironically, U.S. support of anti-communist Zaire probably contributed to the Katangan invasion itself. According to... Cat's hanging out. Dang it, B. Ironically, U.S. support of anti-communist Zaire probably contributed to the Katangan invasion itself. According to an informed American official, the U.S. did not examine very closely Angolan charges that Mobutu was permitting exile attacks on northern Angola. Mobutu's assurances that he had cut back support of the Angolan exiles were simply accepted. However, the sequence of events suggested that Angola allowed the Katangans to return to Zaire in response to these incursions. The crisis in Zaire, had Weissman wrote, dramatized the long-term risks for U.S. interests of 2 decades of USCI intervention in the region. By contributing to inter-African polarization and Cold War tension, the U.S. was increasing the chances for a great power proxy war in Central and Southern Africa and diverting its attention from new multilateral issues of third world interdependence that were becoming more and more urgent. The long-term instrumental goals of U.S. anti-communist efforts in Zaire and Angola were, Weissman continued, politically visible, development and African acceptance. With this in mind, the political scholar questioned, with increasing consciousness of America's economic, political, and military interdependence with the Third World, they are becoming terminal objectives. Has U.S. involvement with its Zairean and Angolan friends generally improved American relations with Africa, or has it intended to complicate them? In 1979, the CIA secretly brought UNITA's Jonas Savimbi to Washington, where he met with then former President Advisor on National Security Henry Kissinger and several high-level U.S. officials. This was evidence that Kissinger continued to play a vital role in developing African foreign policy long after he was officially retired from this responsibility. During his election campaign, Ronald Reagan openly supported UNITA. He hailed Savimbi as a leader who controls more than half of Angola. Angola then added, "I don't see why we shouldn't provide them with weapons." On the eve of Ronald Reagan's inauguration, William Casey, soon to become CIA director, and Richard Allen, subsequently presidential assistant on national security, met with UNITA representatives and assured them of U.S. support. After the inauguration, Ronald Reagan firmly demanded that Congress overrule the Clark Amendment. Then in March 1981, Savimbi was again brought to Washington, this time as an official visit. The same month, Alexander Haig, then Secretary of State, discussed the need to aid UNITA with NATO representatives in London. Not long after, in December 1981, Savimbi was received by the State Department officially as the National Liberation Leader of Angola. Such were the methods employed by America's shadow government in its secret militia, the CIA, in initiating political ties, instilling Western loyalists, and establishing an economic new world order based on diplomatic leverage that was wholly immoral and often lethal. Now I knew that besides desiring population control on this politically volatile region of the world, Kissinger had directed covert military operations there, and had apparently even discussed with CIA Director William Colby, and possibly the Church Committee as well, the likelihood of using illegally developed and stockpiled biological weapons in Zaire, Angola. This may have been the information they withheld for national security reasons. It thus occurred to me that the AIDS-like virus development option Kissinger ordered for Project MK Naomi would have been the ideal untraceable weapons for achieving his goal, to keep our visibility to a minimum while influencing certain events for politically global importance in this gray area of CIA operation. Later, with Bill Colby's untimely and suspicious drowning in the spring of 1996, he drowned in like a waist-deep water in his canoe where he was known to canoe every single day. Allegedly the same result, like Hoover, a heart attack. It also occurred to me that Kissinger and his benefactors may have been secretly grateful to have a chief Project MK Naomi administrator and potentially devastating congressional witness forever silenced. That's it for today. Say hi to B. B, you say hi.